these two are India experts. But if they put some questions, so maybe you can tell us before
Yes, in fact, my experience, I have been friends of India for the last 25 years. So my experience is that more local it is, more relevant it is to media. Because all the media units are hyper including all newspapers, all media channels. If the story relates to something very local and the solution is also local, then it will be sold out story.
Biodiversity
It will be easily acceptable by the editor. Taking it.
About narrative. What are the predominant narratives? Common market and livelihood. And that is if at all there are any narratives. If not, what are the new narratives or shift? That's the broadly the first one. The second one is what are the challenges that we are facing about commons, markets, rural livelihood. And the third one,
नहीं पर वही मैं चाहती थी कि ये भी रहे दोनों रहो दिल्ली से हमेशा हम लोग
ideas,
जितने
practical
ज़्यादा
ideas coming out that can be communicated about markets. I'm just thinking aloud here, like can you come up with a campaign to communicate about commons market around festival time when your Amazons and Flipkarts go and spend millions and billions of dollars. It's about markets, so can you get something like that we created? So try and spend about 15 minutes per question, and we need someone to be a note taker here. The brief to the note taker is don't go into everything that is being said, but try and pull out the key ideas that are implemented in it. So you can spend the last 10 minutes basically summarizing what are the top lines that you want to get on the survey, and then maybe we make the space for everybody to present it back. But if that does not happen, it will be synthesized in centers for the minutes. Okay? All the best. Questions are all here in case anyone has
They hold the animals in the
For some time they will be held in some area and then they will move, and then some other area and then they will move. ऐसा करके एक सिस्टम होना चाहिए इससे हजारों एकड़ का एरिया मैन्योर करते थे और उससे ग्रासलैंड से भी जनरेट ये जो तरीका है ये साइंस ने कोई से ही सीखा ये तरीका इंट्रिंसिक तरीके से हम चला रहे हैं ऐसे ही हमारे देश में भी ऐसे ही कई जगहों पर थोड़े कमजोर पड़े हैं लेकिन बहुत जगहों पर इस तरह से स्टीवर्डशिप के बहुत सारे हर तालाब नियम इस तरह से लोगों ने और हाउ का जवाब दिया तो ये हाउ जो है ये बहुत ही एम्बेडेड है वहाँ के लैंग्वेज इसके अंदर के जो समस्याएं हैं जो उनके सामने क्वेश्चन आए उसको सॉल्व करना उन्होंने किया उसका इसमें इशू ये है मॉडर्न ट्रांसपोर्ट सिस्टम में क्या मॉडल लाते हैं सिस्टम ये है कि भाई आप एक एरिया को से लोगों का कनेक्शन रीजनरेट करना है लोग डिस्टर्ब करना दिस इज द नॉर्मल नैरेटिव लास्ट हम जब हम ये स्टीवर्डशिप का बात करें तो और कम्युनिटीज वो लैंडस्केप के बारे में एक इंट्रिंसिक नॉलेज उनके पास है जो और किसी के पास हो ही नहीं है। माने मैं अपने आप को उत्तराखंड कहता हूँ लेकिन मैं अगर हल्द्वानी में रह रहा हूँ मैं वहाँ पे किसी गाँव में चला जाता तो वहाँ पे गाँव में जाके ये सब चीज़ें देख के भी मैं गारंटी से नहीं कह सकता कि मुझे वो नॉलेज आ जाए क्योंकि वो नॉलेज जो है वो सपोर्टेड है बहुत सारे टेक्निक मैं इसको थोड़ा समझ बोलेगा लेकिन वो कर क्या रहा है सुबह से शाम तक या वो उनके घर में वो दीदी क्या कर रही है बच्चे क्या कर रहे हैं मैं उसके लॉजिक्स नहीं समझता शायद वो समझने के लिए सालों लग जाएंगे शायद फिर भी नहीं समझ में आए तो मेरे पास अपना भी बैग है तो स्टीवर्डशिप का लॉजिक ये है कि लैंडस्केप के बारे में इंट्रिंसिक नॉलेज लोगों के प्राप्त ऐसी नॉलेज और दूसरी बात होगी तो वो समझ भी पाएगा नहीं पाएगा इसकी कोई गारंटी तो दैट इज व्हाई इट इज इम्पोर्टेंट लोग भागीदारी ये लॉजिक जो है वो बहुत जरूरी है समझना हम ये हाउ समझे हाउ वाला जो पार्ट है हाउ पीपल मैनेज दे मैनेज थ्रू दिस स्टीवर्डशिप आइडियाज जो उनको विरासत में मिले सब कुछ वो डेवलप करते जाते हैं अपने अपने नए नए चैलेंजेस तो अब इसको हमें अगर हम कम्युनिकेशन नैरेटिव्स को चैलेंज करने वाले नैरेटिव्स
that no one is going to respect our the
सजना का जो ड्रॉस्टिक का पता ही चला लेकिन कहानी ये है वेस्टर्न में ऐसे ही आपका ड्रॉस्टिक का यहाँ खाएंगे मेथी का साग और यही मेथी का साग और भूतकाल में ले जाओ मेथी का साग इसलिए आप जहाँ का जरूरत है कहानी है कि हम एक चीज़ मिल जाता है तो हमको लगता है हमारे हाथ में मिल गया उसको तो हम अभी क्या हुआ कि हम जैसे ड्रमस्टिक आएगा तो हम ड्रमस्टिक को सारा चीज़ का हल नहीं इसलिए अगर हमारे लोग
people have learned this language to engage with us because we are not learning them.
You can just think a bit more, take 2 minutes. Think what are the narratives that come in way. किसी को कॉल करने का जरूरत है या बात करने का क्या नैरेटिव हमारे डायरेक्शन में आप अगर आपने किसी को सिखाई देते हैं
हमारा जो ट्रेडिशनल गेट पीस और नेटिव पीस हमारे यहाँ 20-30% तो हम हमेशा गरीब मतलब गरीब
so that they don't learn that side of it.
हमारा
The knowledge system,
आदिवासी
knowledge system.
तो ये सारा प्राइड वाला चीज अलग
Handout तो साल में आप मिनिमम मान लीजिए 500 ये नंबर they did not join one, but
What you are saying is also one thing that support not very clear. There is a need to help know how to use this message. मतलब वो understanding यही नहीं तो आप लिखेंगे इवेंट को कैप्चर करना पड़ेगा और उसका करोड़ों कोई देखता है उसको इसमें दूसरी
कैपेसिटी है वो फॉलो
इन्होंने मेहनत किया वो आने
चामुंडी जो आई है तो हमारे साथ उसके ऊपर कहानी 10 महीने में बढ़ने के बारे में उसके ऊपर बात हो रही कितना
कॉमर्स की कलेक्शन की कहानी शुरू कर सालों पहले किसी को समझ में आया
मैं भी 50 साल की
स्टोरी 50 साल के बाद गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर में वहाँ तक की जरूरत है तो वहाँ वो क्या जानते हैं किस तरह से कंट्रीब्यूट कोई प्रोग्राम में क्वेश्चन बनाए तो पंचायत का जो हाल है वैसा ही होने वाला है
and come up with a kind of a very not only Rajasthan and many states are the very pointed strategies we have to make it.
जब हम लोग ये जो एक्सरसाइज जब हम फॉरेस्ट का कम्युनिटी की बात करते हैं तो बात नहीं कौन बनेगा बोल सकते हैं 7-8 आप बैठ जाओ पेपर कौन जानता है वही बढ़िया तो वो जो उनको अच्छा वो है एस्टैब्लिश करने के लिए पूरी कहानी बता
हम तो दूसरी
maybe crisis. Whenever there's a crisis, so we need to take a more important investment for economy. We have to work to actually reverse the development of peace. But we also have a आपकी बात जो माँ पैदा हुई उसने कंट्रीब्यूशन कैसा किया है कांट इग्नोर तो वैसे ही क्लाइमेट में कॉमर्स की कंट्रीब्यूशन जहाँ पे काफ़ी सारे जगह पे हम लोग फॉरेस्ट के गाड़ी आया काफी
Second question is just time check.
उनकी एक्सेस कुछ
Guys, just a time check in case you want. You can move to the next last question. And at 12:45, we will have space for each group to go and present their top 3-4 ideas. Okay? Third question. Find some time
But it is better to discuss first is also because there is
like a exchange of information. Now, But the problem is the exchange of information. So when we don't know, many because we depend so many things unless newspapers like you don't have a feed and so you know exactly. But reporters like us don't have a feed, right? So if we have to say developing a new on climate and gender, then we are thinking, okay, what are the things we should be focusing on? हमारे पास वो information नहीं है, हमारे पास बस वही है कि हम करना है, right? And so if we want to do that, हमको भी reach out to how to build our own understanding. हमें internal understanding बनानी पड़ेगी पहले कि पे focus करना है और ये focus करना है. So like what is our area of change? हम क्या बदलना चाहते हैं? किस चीज़ की information की ज़रूरत है? So and that is where I feel that this sort of instrumental relationship जो अभी
Right. 4 मिनट और.
ample rasa.
Okay, 5 more minutes. 50, I'm going to start inviting whoever is ready to present. Start
Technology, the concept, we have to present.
Alright, guys, it's time. People who are still having a conversation and not ready, maybe they should go 5th or 6th, but whoever's ready, if they would like to volunteer and present their top ideas, 2 minutes. Not more than 2 minutes. Alright, who's going first? Going first. Who wants to go first? They get a special prize for the piece. Your group wants to go first?
Another 2 minutes? Another 3-4 minutes.
So you guys are ready? Fantastic. Okay, give a big round of applause for the first group. Commons and gender. Who is presenting from your group?
Sapna, you are?
Hello, hello, hello. Can I have the attention of everyone, please?
अच्छा ठीक है तो 5 मिनट और ले लो बट 5 मिनट क्लोज करके सबका सुनना पड़ेगा because we will never be able to finish this in like 1 hour ये चलता रहेगा 5 more minutes
The larger question is how to get
Okay, guys, I think it's time, and I don't want to keep people away from lunch. Can I request everyone to stop the conversation here?
क्या अभी हम बोल सकते हैं? Can we go now? No more minutes left. Hello. Yeah, so the group that we were discussing on commons and gender, we had a discussion around how understanding around gender is not there. The current status quo is we don't really see commons being covered from using a gender lens. So the current status quo is not there. So what is the shift and then we want to do when we are going for a deep diving conversation with that, we realize there are a couple of systemic problems which is already existing. एक तो है कि सब डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल, डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल एंड स्टेट लेवल पे महिला जर्नलिस्ट की संख्या बहुत कम है. डिस्ट्रिक्ट एंड सब डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पे तो कुछ सारे स्टेट्स में है ही नहीं. There is no women journalist working at the district and sub district level. At least somebody who will be empathizing to a story around, using a gender lens. So one area is a gray area of is that not having enough people to tell the story. Second problem that we saw is the kind of people who are coming to the sector and the kind way one has to pitch in a story, then the story getting a highlight to cover all encompassing kind of a process is also not there. Either you capture an event or you impact, but you don't capture the process. Supposedly, you are capturing a story around nature conservation or water conservation or anything on climate. You only look at the impact level. Only if you go to the process, maybe then you'll know how other social groups have contributed, especially women, the way they have contributed. So, in the entire report, when it becomes only a narrative around impact and numbers, data, you don't really see the women in there, because anyway, data also doesn't have women. Most of the data that is available doesn't have a gender disaggregated data. So how do you then build a story around women or any other gender group that is there? Third major problem that we wanted that the narrative has to shift is this kind of engagement is happening around events. Then you can't build, because for everybody to use this lens of gender requires a long-term kind of a discussion and investment. It doesn't really have to be women to tell the story of women, but even a man to tell the story of a woman. How do that person then really start using it, start becoming sensitized about it, start using a lens of it? It requires a long-term investment. It requires a long-term kind of a discussion dialogue. So the recommendation that come from this group is one is, and the other problem that we identified is also for the people who are getting trained even in journalism, many women do not continue to be a part of this journey because they do not have a role model. They do not see Khabar Area or Ben Box or Kavita kind of people or Sardadi kind of people to be able to imagine that they can reach to that position. So there is a lot of scope to create more heroes than the heroes in the journalism sector, so that they get inspired and they start contributing it. So these are the steps that we wanted to do is, want to have continuous dialogue, district, sub-district, state, national, and not have an agenda as to what will be the outcome, how many stories will be captured, but to tell and interact and continuously engage with each other, and so that we build a common vocabulary around what kind of gender story we want to do. Whether it is around governance, whether it is around role that they played, whether their knowledge, whatever. Second is, we are suggesting how this zeros that is present in the national or the state level can impact and influence the one at the district and sub-district level. So if there is a possible of these people going, talking in different institutes, engaging within different kind of forums, platforms, so that more people get interested, more women get interested are to work in district and sub-district level to be able to capture the real stories, where the things are actually happening. Third was investing in a relationship building, because if the closer they go to the event, they will be able to capture the process. So that requires a planned investment in interacting both civil society and media houses, so that if a media capture a story and to go to provide that kind of a support at the local level, to be able to see things really happening and then be able to write about it, rather than just doing it on a secondary kind of information, providing data and events capturing and then providing that kind of information. Yeah, that's, I think, precisely the one's suggestion that we discussed. Thank you.
Who wants to go next?
ये हम लोग वही से यहीं से शुरू कर रहे थे कि करंट नैरेटिव क्या है। तो करंट नैरेटिव अभी जो है वो है कि क्या प्रोडक्शन के ऊपर ज़्यादा और नैरेटिव है कि अभी के हिसाब से कितना प्रोडक्शन है, प्रोडक्शन और न्यूट्रिशनल वैल्यू में ही दोनों में, प्रोडक्शन वर्सेस न्यूट्रिशन वैल्यू, ये दोनों का नैरेटिव में थोड़ा वो है। हमारा जो थीम है वो है कॉमन्स हेल्थ एंड फूड सिक्योरिटी वाला ग्रुप से। तो मोनोकल्चर कितना कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है या जो आज के करंट नैरेटिव में वो डिस्कोर्स में, उसके ऊपर थोड़ा बात करना था। दूसरा था कि होमोजेनियस, मतलब सारा ग्रुप एक जैसा चीज़ सोचता है, उसके ऊपर लेके बात था। तीसरा था कि ये ट्रेडिशन वाली बात हम लोग जितने कर रहे हैं, ट्रेडिशनल कंट्रीब्यूट करता है कि बैकवर्ड को, जैसे मतलब ऐसा लग रहा था कि जितने ट्रेडिशनल वैल्यू सिस्टम को जो जिंदा रखें वो बैकवर्ड जैसे हम उनको नज़र में लाते हैं। ये तीसरा एक लग रहा था कि जो ट्रेडिशनल नॉलेज सिस्टम है वो कितना कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा था आज के नैरेटिव को बिल्ड करने में, और जो प्राइड सिस्टम था वो हमारा डेटोरेट हो रहा है। हम अपना चीज़ों को प्राइड फीलिंग नहीं कर रहे आज का नैरेटिव में। तीसरा था कि ये क्यों हो रहा है आज के नैरेटिव, तो जो वॉइस और जो एजेंसी है इन दोनों का एब्सेंस लग रहा था कि उसको क्यों हो रहा है आज के नैरेटिव में। फिर हम बात करके कि इसके लिए ऑडियंस फिर कौन कौन है। अगर इस मुद्दे को अगर जाएंगे, ये करंट नैरेटिव और उसको शिफ्ट के ऊपर जाएंगे, तो इसके लिए ऑडियंस कौन कौन हो सकता है। तो एक ऑडियंस हमको लग रहा था कि जो इसको लेके आगे तक जा सकते हैं, पॉलिसी मेकर्स हो सकते हैं या इस मुद्दे को लेके जो बात करते हैं। दूसरा ये लग रहा था कि जो लोग क्लाइमेट और फूड न्यूट्रिशन के ऊपर काम कर रहे हैं, वैसे ऑडियंस को साथ में लेके जाएं। और एक बड़ा मेजर पार्ट है जो ट्रेंड सेटर हैं, जिनको देख के बाकी लोग सोचते हैं कि हम ऐसे आगे बढ़े, हमारा एस्पिरेशन को वो ड्राइव करते हैं, अर्बन या मेन स्ट्रीम लोग हैं। तो उनके बास्केट में ऐसी चीज़ अगर आएगा तो हम उनको देखेंगे या उस चीज़ से करेंगे। और जो उसका गार्डियंस है, जो उसको बचा के रखा है आज तक कॉमन्स और फूड सिस्टम को, तो लोकल कम्युनिटी जो उसको जिंदा रखें, वो भी हमारा टारगेट ऑडियंस है कि वहाँ का स्टोरी को हम हाईलाइट करें, उनके चीज़ों को बताएं कि लोगों को कि ये कितना कंट्रीब्यूट हमारे जीवन के लिए कर रहा है और समाज के लिए क्या कंट्रीब्यूशन है। और मेजर चीज़ है इसमें क्रॉस कटिंग अलग जगह पर है, सपना पर ऑलरेडी बोल चुके हैं। हालांकि इसमें भी हमको फोकस करना है कि जेंडर लेंस उसमें कहाँ कहाँ फिट बैठता है, और एक मेजर एजेंडा। ऑब्जेक्टिव हमने 5-6 सोचे थे कि इसमें क्या कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है। वो चीज़ ये सोचे थे कि जो भी पॉलिसी है वो ज़्यादातर लोकलाइज या कॉन्टेक्स्ट स्पेसिफिक हो, एक जैसा कोई भी एक ही ब्लैंकेट सबके लिए उड़ाने वाली बात ना हो, तो हर जगह के लिए अलग अलग कॉन्टेक्स्ट में। दूसरा था कि ये जो कुछ इवेंट भी हम लोगों ने सोचे थे, लेकिन चीज़ था कि ऑब्जेक्टिव में है कि कैसे वो प्राइड है फिर से लोगों के पास वो गर्व महसूस करेंगे, वो प्राइड बैक करेंगे। तीसरा ऑब्जेक्टिव ऐसा था कि जो फूड है, फूड वर्सेस न्यूट्रिशन के ऊपर बात है। खाली खाना तो नहीं है कि हमारे पास कितना, मतलब उसमें न्यूट्रिशन क्या मिल रहा है वो चीज़। और एक है कि ये जितना सारा कॉमन से चीज़ें आता है उसको मेडिसिन के हिसाब से देखते हैं हम। वैसे आयुर्वेदिक चरक संहिता में कहते हैं कि दवाई से 100 गुना अच्छा है कि आप क्या खाना खा रहे हैं, वो हैबिट है। तो उसके वो एक ऑब्जेक्टिव है उसको करने के लिए। तीसरा है कि ये कितना ऑब्जेक्टिव है कि हम जो कार्बन फुटप्रिंट वाली बात आजकल आज के नैरेटिव में काफ़ी मेन स्ट्रीम है, तो वो कितना कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है, खास करके कॉमन्स और फूड सिस्टम और वो सारा चीज़ें। तो इसके लिए अपॉर्चुनिटी के ऊपर बात करने लगे हम। लास्ट हालांकि उसमें नहीं पहुँचे। अपॉर्चुनिटी में हमको क्या क्या लग रहा था कि अपॉर्चुनिटी में लग रहा था कि जो आज के जो नैरेटिव है उसमें ये कहाँ फिट बैठता है। तो आज के नैरेटिव में एसडीजी के ऊपर अगर हम सारे लोग डिपार्टमेंट से लेके गवर्नमेंट है, पॉलिसी मेकर्स है, तो एसडीजी में ये क्या फिट बैठ रहा है और कितना एसडीजी का गोल इसको कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है, उसको हाईलाइट करना है और उसको लोकलाइजेशन के ऊपर जाना है। तीसरा ये लग रहा था कि क्लाइमेट मिटिगेशन और एडेप्टेशन को लेके अगर जब बात करें तो कॉमन्स और फूड सिस्टम क्या कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है और उसमें जो अपॉर्चुनिटी उसको हाईलाइट करना है। दूसरा था कि हम जो ग्लोबल कमिटमेंट्स है, तो वो ग्लोबल कमिटमेंट्स में कॉमन्स और लोकल फूड सिस्टम और न्यूट्रिशन क्या कंट्रीब्यूट कर रहा है। तो वो ग्लोबल कमिटमेंट्स को हमारा अलग से नैरेटिव में उसको फोकस करना है कि उस पर जाना है। दूसरा एक लग रहा था कि कुछ एक्टिविटी के लग रहा था कि जो ऑलरेडी बहुत सारा सेलिब्रेशन फेस्टिवल्स, इंटरनेशनल फेस्टिवल्स, नेशनल फेस्टिवल्स है, उसमें एम्बेडेड कैसे होगा। और हाँ, उसमें एक चीज़ हम लोग बात कर रहे थे कि जो फिल्म स्कूल्स है, ग्राफिक डिजाइन है और इस इलस्ट्रेशंस है, उसमें ये कितना अच्छे से कम्युनिकेट हो सकता है स्टोरीज़ के माध्यम से या अलग अलग मीडिया में इस चीज़ को, क्योंकि ये जो मेन स्ट्रीम मीडिया में कभी नहीं आता है कि कॉमन्स और फूड सिस्टम के बात में। कभी भी अगर कहीं भी फिल्म में या कहीं भी जगह पर देखते हैं, कहीं नहीं देखे होंगे कोई भाजी खा रहा होगा, कोई पखाल खा रहा होगा, कहीं नहीं देखे होंगे, कुछ अच्छा ही खा रहा होगा, मतलब उसके हिसाब से। तो वो चीज़ों को है। और मेजर चीज़ और एक था कि गवर्नमेंट का जितने सारा प्रोग्राम्स और एजेंडा में लोकलाइज पंचायत से लेके NIRD से लेके सारा चीज़ इसको कैसे सोच रहे हैं, और उसका एक चीज़ें ऐसे सोच रहे थे अपॉर्चुनिटी, अगर ग्राम सभा है या पैसा एरिया में खास करके, तो वो ग्राम सभा कितना डिसाइड ले सकता है उस चीज़ों को लेके सोचने के लिए, कॉमन्स और चीज़ों को। तो उसके लिए खाली ग्राम सभा करने से नहीं होगा, उसके लिए उसका जो इकोसिस्टम है उस पर जाना है, पंचायत राज डिपार्टमेंट जाना है, उसको सपोर्ट स्टाफ करने के लिए, कैपेसिटी बिल्डिंग करने के लिए। अगर NIRD कर रहा है तो NIRD में PR में वो इनकॉर्पोरेट होना चाहिए, तब जाके थोड़ा सा दिमाग में आएगा। और सिविल सोसाइटी में ऐसे सोच रहे थे कि लार्जर इन्फ्लुएंस और चीज़ों को लेके जाने के लिए। थैंक यू। और कुछ छूट गया तो
Okay, so our theme was community stewardship of commons. Very sort of, I would say, covers everything and is at the same time. The couple of current narratives that we identified that I think a lot of people will also relate with. One was a lot of what we see right now is removal of people from sort of so-called protected lands. If you want to protect a landscape, if you want to protect something, people should not be there. That is, I think, a narrative that's been going on a fair bit, and then it becomes like a sort of sanctuary or whatever it is that you call it, but it sort of becomes protected without the indigenous people there. That's one sort of current narrative that's been coming up a fair bit. Second was, I think, just a lack of understanding, public understanding on what local stewardship actually means and how people can engage with commons, whether people know what commons are there around them or not, and how sort of they can engage with them. Because a lot of, like I was saying, a lot of resources you access on the daily or a lot of places that you pass on the daily may be part of commons, but you may just not classify it as that yet. So that is a narrative that you sort of currently may not see. There's also a lack of context-specific education. A lot of, even in sort of, let's say, villages, etc., a lot of alienation of communities from sort of the core of what they do, especially in the regions that they work in. Like one of our sort of members was mentioning, where people who work in the region don't necessarily have the same aspirations that, let's say, their parents did or their grandparents did. And even in schools around the region, you will see that reflected in terms of what it is, sort of what does it mean to be developed, or what does it mean to sort of even conserve, let's say, for example, or restore environments around you. That has changed a fair bit, so that context-specific education doesn't exist. It's more of a generalized state of things as far as collectives are concerned. Another thing, of course, and this is, I think, something that many people align with, is indigenous knowledge is not necessarily sort of valued, even though it is contextual, even though it's tacit. You don't necessarily see it being recorded. You don't necessarily see it being archived. Your oral traditions, all of those kinds of knowledge that's passed on from word of mouth, that's not considered credible when you cite it somewhere, unless you're doing it as a story or whatever. Those kinds of current narratives sort of exist. In terms of the opportunities we identified where we could spotlight a little bit more of sort of community stewardship, couple of things. One, in terms of reporting specifically, as reporters, how do you sort of come in as allies and not necessarily as observers? That's a critical thing, because when you're talking about commons, it links a lot of things. It links identity, it links sociopolitics. There's a sort of couple of things associated even around that. So how do you come in as an ally and say, we are not just observers, but we would like to be part of what it is that you're trying to do. And also in that process, offering and maintaining the dignity of communities and not necessarily looking at it as sort of the subject of your work only, right? How do you make sure that in your work that is communicated? The other thing was, for people who are not well-versed with commons, how do you demystify the rules and regulations around commons? Because what does the term mean? Where is access sort of, where do you see that access? Are you allowed to access this particular area or not? What kind of governance exists in that space? So that demystification of how commons are regulated, I think, is sort of fairly limited, and that's an opportunity that we can sort of identify to build further. Another one, I think, is the culture of care. That's something that, whether across your education or just how you communicate, that culture of care is really lacking. So how do you build that collective mindset, and how do you sort of further that? There's a lot of self-care, you would say, but not as a community. How do you build those communities even in sort of urban areas as well as in rural areas, and have that community sort of thinking? So that is a good sort of way to engage people. One critical thing that we sort of identified was having generative dialogue at a local level, and how media, how sort of reporting, all of those things can potentially hold those spaces for communities to come together, for researchers to come together, to have that dialogue and not necessarily have it be a sort of top-down kind of thing, and sort of, further those kinds of, the vocabulary that's being used from top to bottom kind of thing. So that having that dialogue and offering the space to have that dialogue, I think, is very critical. The other bit was, you as somebody sort of, whether you work in the space or not, how do you map your area of influence? What are the stakeholders that you can affect? As somebody who works in mass media, of course, you'll be able to affect a larger number of people. But if you're not working in mass media, who are the people that you are sort of to sort of work with to, let's say, for example, further information or further communication on commons? That's a critical thing. And you target your work accordingly. So I think we identified 3 ways that way. One is obviously mass media, the other is alternate media, and third is community media. So how do you strategize to sort of further your actions considering those 3 channels accordingly? Also, one other thing I think would be sort of, how do you use climate communication that's happening? Everywhere you'll see climate communication. So how do you use that and sort of work with commons to sort of build that understanding around feedback loops, etc. How a lot of indigenous knowledge gives you that information about climate knowledge, just not in the data format, but more in sort of how you would sort of observe trends over longer periods of time, etc. So how do you archive that knowledge and also use that? Because these are people who've lived there for XYZ years and know the trends inside out. So how do you use that and sort of build credibility for that? And the final thing, which, 2 things actually. One, when you're reporting, when you're communicating, to track the impact of what it is that you're communicating. That's a critical bit, because then you're able to sort of, you have that ability to dynamically then change what it is that you're communicating further. So I think that's something we were observing in terms of what is it that works and what is it that doesn't work. That needs to be sort of noted. And the final bit was, I think, more around community values. So a lot of systems thinking needs to be pushed right from sort of your education, right from the childhood, where you're saying, these are community principles and these are values that need to be upheld. How you do it is dependent on you, but just establishing that base for people to sort of then build on further is fairly critical. And that's how stewards sort of
basically sort of manage their resources and their land as well, right? So that's a critical bit. Of course, the way you do it is sort of changes from context to context, but the idea that everybody has the agency to be able to do that, it's sort of what pathway you pick that's critical. Anything to add?
I think what we also discussed very importantly was when we are creating all of this content and stories and all of that, the other critical need is to also engage with how people consume news. There's a lot of unverified news that is floating around, right? So that also needs to be also looked at in terms of educating people and how to consume information. Unless you're a communicator, it doesn't come easily. So that's another area of opportunity, threat, whatever it is.
Yeah, thank you. This is a group on commons, markets, and rural livelihoods. And we had about 4 plus 3, 7 people, and we have only 1 journalist in this. All of us are people who are still talking about the same language, and thanks to Nidhi for bringing us back to this. I think we need certainly more people to come in so that we can brainstorm ideas. We talked about the predominant narratives which exist today, which requires change. I think one is related to the general public. The present narratives of commons are wastelands, commons are no one's baby, and commons have no value also puts out quite a bit on the ownership on who owns this, and therefore the narratives and what they decide on is a very important thing which need to be addressed. And the second one is about commons, how they are looked at in the markets. I think the market narrative is about get everything as a cheapest market price rather than a true value. I think this is across the consumers, customers, and also decision makers who are deciding for those customers, including those corporate level, market level, all this. So that's a market narrative is very important. And third one is about when we talked about the financial institutions which provide capital, working capital, debt, etc. All those cases. I think the commons are very complex, and it is government's business, and financing is very difficult because risk cannot be assessed. Once it's risk cannot be assessed, risk cannot be incorporated into the pricing, is something which will not. So that narrative on financial institutions are very important. And on the carbon markets which are coming in, which provide a huge opportunity. Again, everything is about, the credit is about carbons, and beyond carbons, how to bring in commons into that marketplace is something which is a narrative along with the templates, etc. required. Otherwise, that particular narrative cannot provide us for the biodiversity plus people's outcomes, etc. And the last part is about community's own understanding of the market needs, which includes the information asymmetry is one, but we should also look at what are the opportunities for what market provides for the consumers is for the communities is something which need to be looked at. Right? So the challenges, I'm just rushing a bit on this. So the whole thing is about we were finding it difficult how to connect commons to any of these, either the products or this one. I think it requires quite a lot of thing while the narrative has to shift. So how do we connect this as one of the big challenges? Because many times the markets operate through a good template, and the template is something which is validated and it goes with the trusted data. That is something which is an area. And I think a couple of other groups are also talked about is about this whole the trust and the validation of who says what, and that's something which is very important. So we don't know how to sort of crack it. It's something which is a big challenge here. And third is about so going to the ideas. I think a couple of more challenges which are related to how do we convert this connect this commons to the market language. Ideas wise, I think one, we thought that if we keep on looking at the commons, I think there should be a label, possibly a commons label, because it's also over a period of time, I think we had many labels, organic label, wild kind of thing. I think something which is related to the commons label will be useful. And celebration of commons, I think that's also something which came in, which can be linked to, I think you also talked about on these Amazon sales too, all these festive sales, etc. All this, can this be brought in here? And the third one is about this various words which are used around commons, the stigma around commons, the way it is looked at. A terminology of what are the various things. We talked about the Porambok as T.M. Krishna who sang this thing on Porambok, so which brought back this whole idea of that. So can we bring in those words and then say destigmatize, bring it back here? That's another one. CEO forum is something which the places where the decisions are taken, can we look at those people in the governance who decide on market incentives and all that, can we bring in those areas there? And I think you want to talk about the last one on the healing thing?
Just regarding the opportunities thing for market, we were thinking that, like he said that we have this GI tag, organics tag. Can we have a commons tag? And we start using this tag for the products. Like the idea came from the kit which was given to us. It has that golden grass box. So that's one thing if we could do. The other thing was, can we have some kind of an annual, let's celebrating commons kind of a thing, where we bring together all the creators and producers of commons products which are coming out of our commons and give them a platform, like something like that as a thing. And also linking commons with the healing and wellness industry, because a lot of our community forest also, our sacred groves have medicinal plants and herbs and all that. So can we also link it to that kind of market? That was again one of the ideas that came in.
That's from a side, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
This group has discussed on commons and climate. So I'll quickly. So the narratives that we all relate to, I think we see in the news, are mostly around, mostly reactive. So there's a climate event, कुछ flood या कुछ ऐसा कोई climate event हो जाता है तो उसका report आता है, या फिर there's a lot of narratives around carbon offsets, carbon accounting. Everything is considered in carbon currency, and there are a lot of positive news. अगर बात करें तो climate में tree plantation drives and इस तरीके के बहुत सारे news आता है. Or most of the news is dominated by urban issues, waste management, air pollution, and nothing really gets covered from rural commons. And knowledge and understanding जो lacking है climate को लेके भी और commons को लेके भी, उसको लेके भी कोई ऐसा narrative आज के तारीख में नहीं है. So those narratives are not there. And we discussed about some of the, my group members kindly add if I have missed anything. So some of the shifts or opportunities that can be brought is, how do journalists, I think our group had probably large number of journalist members. So they voiced that a lot of local examples from rural commons can be brought into stories. Embedding these narratives in education would be helpful, and also considering cultural aspects and aspirations of rural areas, rural population, bringing those stories out. For example, recognizing the value of wastelands, how that can become a story. Lot of data which is validated, which is useful for journalists to create stories, are missing. So there needs to be a locally available data which is validated, and probably a network of local storytellers who can be a source for journalists to build on the stories. And story ideas भी चाहिए, leads भी चाहिए commons पे और climate पे, जिनको अगर कोई repository बना सके तो journalist के लिए बहुत अच्छा होगा, क्योंकि they can pick from that and build stories. बहुत सारे capacity gaps है policies में, like climate action plan बन जाता है state level पे, national level पे, उसका accountability को पूछने के लिए कोई चाहिए, तो journalists can play that role, so they can build those stories. उस capacity gap को journalists के capacity gap को कैसे build कर सकते हैं, वो भी एक opportunity है. Building capacity of local journalists to work on these stories, उनको exposure दिलाना, और उनको connect करना subject matter experts है. उनको अगर flood पे story करना है तो flood related या उस related कोई भी subject matter experts से कैसे connect कर सकते हैं, stories ले सकते हैं. Tracking government initiatives, government के बहुत सारे initiatives है जो in line with climate and commons, but उन stories पे, उन पे stories बनाना और track करना कि उन policies का क्या हाल है और क्या कैसे mechanism है कि नहीं है उन चीज़ों पे. But given that all these opportunities exist, there are challenges कि एक तो info और data, validated data and record of climate events, ये सब एक जगह पे expert views, ये सब access नहीं है journalist को, या फिर पता नहीं है कहाँ से access करना है, तो ये एक gap है. तो दूसरा, how to make stories more interesting and attractive, and how these stories can be prioritized over stories on defense, politics, entertainment, या फिर is there any other way to make these stories more attractive? Or sometimes stories also desensitize people because there are too many stories which are about disasters and floods and this and that. So how to make sure that it doesn't desensitize, because readers don't then continue to follow. Mainstream media ये भी कर सकता है कि जो urban readers है उनको ध्यान में रखते हुए पूरा stories बनते हैं, लेकिन commons जो हम देखते हैं पूरा rural side ज़्यादा heavily वो है, तो उसके बीच में link कैसे बनाए, तो can stories also connect these linkages. So these are some of the challenges we thought in the group. Other members, if anyone want to add. Thank you.
Last group.
Yeah, the disadvantage of going last, also an advantage is we might not have to repeat many things. So we started with understanding what are those narratives around biodiversity, and like the food and the market group, what we also realized is, even for gender, that in biodiversity also the narrative is lacking, mostly because there is lack of a direct link between commons and biodiversity, and that's primarily because commons are largely seen as wastelands. And we took a step back to understand why commons are seen as wasteland, because commons have a much wider, diverse meaning, which includes forest, wetlands, some of the most productive systems. Then we realized that because most of the work around commons have happened around grazing commons, that has also driven the idea that because most grazing land, grasslands, are also part of the wasteland atlas of India, that's what has driven that narrative that most commons are wastelands. So that needs to be countered. So that's an opportunity too. Within whatever biodiversity stories or narrative emerges, they are mostly concentrated around the big wildlife. So for example, if a tiger or an elephant happens to be somewhere around commons, then it becomes a story. Stories of human-wildlife conflict is also something which media picks up. And there is a very strong bias for protected areas when it comes to understanding or people perceiving biodiversity, that biodiversity belongs in forests, mostly protected areas. Outside protected areas are all poor in biodiversity. Commons are also seen as low productive systems, again driven by the wasteland narrative. And we also tried to look at or categorize the narratives across four broad categories. Media, so in media, like I told, it's mostly around tigers, then protected area, some of the crime, the wildlife crimes that gets covered. And despite commons supporting far more critically endangered species, unfortunately, media doesn't pick up those, but it's largely driven by tiger, which is also a problem with the conservation narrative. In research, the focus has been on the utilitarian aspects of biodiversity, that means those parts of biodiversity which people directly use. Also the ecosystem services, functions, pollination, and so on and so on. Among the corporate media, they see commons as an opportunity to push for many of the green initiatives, like some of which are misplaced, like the monocultures, energy parks, and mostly these are done through CSR money. And wastelands, like again, because commons are seen as wasteland, the development narrative is that these are the only land which should be prioritized for development, despite them being biodiversity rich, which is also missing from the larger narrative. Then we started looking for the challenges, and one of the big consensus within the group was that there has been a big shift in the media priority, which is now focused more on covering sensational stories around entertainment rather than public interest. So those stories which fit, and usually biodiversity stories do not fit these categories. The other important thing which emerged is that there is a general, biodiversity is seen as a very technical term. So there is a lack of access or understanding to the whole idea of biodiversity itself. So that there is an opportunity there too, that we need to demystify this whole idea of biodiversity and make it more accessible to the local, like the local communities and the different strata of our, like the public. And someone used the word de-jargonize. I think that is really, really important. And also like people are looking at commons less for food these days, because in the rural areas, the aspirational shift is towards consuming more packaged, like fancy or glamorous foods rather than the nutritious food available from uncultivated bioresources or biodiversity of commons. And another important thing is the tenure of commons are very complicated, which is a big challenge when it comes to, say, people like us who wants to work on biodiversity, wants to collect data, but we are not often clear about whom to ask permissions for. Sometimes it's also not safe for many of the gadgets that we use to collect data on biodiversity. So those are some of the challenges. And another very important challenge is that most people still are working in silos. So we need to break those silos also. So the opportunity there is that we need to engage in more interdisciplinary research. Some of the other opportunities which I didn't already mention is that we need to engage with social media, the regional media and the digital media. And there has to be some kind of an orientation towards what biodiversity means, how it can be explained better to the consumers of the media. And we should also look at that biodiversity have multiple values. So when we expand the values around biodiversity, which is not just focused on its intrinsic or inherent value that biodiversity should exist because it's out there, but also why it is valuable for us because of reasons like climate, because of food, because of aesthetics, because it gives me joy, mental peace. All these values should also be tied closely with biodiversity so that people understand biodiversity better. And then some brilliant suggestions came that when we write stories about biodiversity, it doesn't need to be very technical, text-driven, but also photo essays can be pitched. And then also, there has to be a clear linkage between biodiversity in commons and public interest news. And some bit of intersectionality should be incorporated in such connections. And then also, someone also mentioned that we also need to give or empower the stewards of the commons to tell their own stories around biodiversity and all. So there needs to be some kind of capacity building, training, access to these different kind of media tools and approaches so that grassroots can tell their own own biodiversity story, because it's also very important to understand who is telling this story. And another thing that we miss, but when the food group was talking about, we realized that we didn't discuss about the idea of traditional knowledge, which is very, very important when it comes to articulating the idea of biodiversity from commons. And we also need to see that biodiversity is closely linked to nutrition through uncultivated wild biodiversity, which is used as food by people. And also many aspects of biodiversity which are very, very important for the cultures. So those are some of the potential opportunities which can bring the biodiversity element of commons in the mainstream. Anything that I missed, someone would like to add?
Thank you, Rajkamalji. I know I can see some very hungry faces. I'm not going to keep you away from lunch. I have one question and one announcement. The question is, it was a fantastic conversation. I know a lot of people, wanted to keep going on, but trust me, this is the first of the many conversations that we're going to have. So the question was, give me a show of hands if you would all be open to creating a group of this people in the room so that we can continue to stay connected, bounce ideas off each other, ask for help, support, look for mentors. Can I see a show of hands? It'll be in two forms. There'll be one WhatsApp group and there'll be a mailing list. And I promise there won't be any happy birthday or good morning, good night messages on the WhatsApp group. We'll keep it same. Okay, I see nods and hands. All right, so that's a go. Second, just an announcement, go get your lunch, but at 1:40, 1:50 and 2, Badri's, 1:30, 1:40 and 1:50, there will be group photo. So, oh, that's true. 1:30 is already over. So 1:40, 1:50 and 2 o'clock. Correct? The photo will be downstairs in the lobby just in front of Baba Sahib statue. So find your slot. Thank you very much and let's have lunch.